Welcome to the first lesson in the Mesmerism and Fascination mini course here. And I wanted to start off with this Mesmerism course, first of all, by giving you a little bit of an idea as to how to go about engaging in this course. I'd like you to step into this with a beginner's mind. So, what I'm asking you to do is take everything you think you know and put it to one side, and listen to this and watch these videos and read the associated documents and so forth with a true beginner's mind. Imagine you know nothing. And what that allows you to do is if you're listening with your belief system, your current belief system in intact in place, and I say something that goes against that, you'll reject it as that's not true, that's bullshit, he's making stuff up. And you won't learn. And if you listen to something and it aligns with that belief system that you've got engaged, then you say, yeah, that resonates. I understand that. I've got that. So again, you're not learning anything new. In order to actually learn anything new, you need to do something called engaging beginner's mind. And what that involves doing is putting aside everything you think you know and just taking as fact everything I say. Now, everything I say is not fact. It's my opinion. It's some frames that I've got. It's some constructs I've built to try and explain this to myself and get to a point where I'm consistently getting better at what I do as a trainer, as a therapist, as a coach, and just as a human being. So, engage beginner's mind, put all the stuff you know to one side. You can re-engage it after. You can drop anything you don't think is useful from anything I say. Please use the bits that you find useful. I'm hoping that there's enough in here to find useful that you will engage with the community and get something beneficial out of this and grow as a human being and another one of us weird spirits in corporeal form. So, before I go off on a weird woo woo tangent, let's have a look at the history of mesmerism. And we can't really do that without first asking, you know, what is mesmerism? If we look at it from the perspective of an idea of one person manipulating some form of energy to help another person heal, then this is present in pretty much all of human history. It's laying of hands in the Bible, it's pranic healing, it's chi, it's ki, it's Huna energy healing. It's got so many different names. There was various practices in the UK, in Ireland, in Scotland, of people doing these sort of energy healing practices. It's all over the world. Everywhere you look, every dark corner of the world has stories about this sort of stuff. So mesmerism was not the start of this. This goes back to the beginning of human history, really. But the idea of using magnets and magnetic fluid can sort of be traced back to Paracelsus. We know before that there was sleep temples in Greece and Egypt, and they were doing dream incubation and entering trance states with chanting and things like that. But this is all over the world. This was going on. Paracelsus was the first person I can find anyway that started to look at this as a potential influence of subtle energies from the planets, from the stars, from Earth itself, from the solar system, causing an effect within the physical body. And his idea was that there was an internal alchemist that was reacting to these subtle shifts in energy, and along with the imagination, was creating changes within the physical system. So he explained it as this magnetic fluid, but it wasn't in the same vein as water as a fluid. It was, I think, in my understanding of what he was writing, I think what he was trying to do was explain something before we had the language of psychology. So remember, this is all like pre-modern psychology, modern psychiatry, modern medicine. This is like the end of the era of magic into the beginning of the era of science. We're starting to look at what's going on here. Why is this working? There was never a dispute that mesmerism worked. It worked. The dispute was about how it worked and whether Mesmer's claims of this animal magnetic fluid and the influence of this fluid was real or not. So, from Paracelsus all the way to Mesmer, there's a few other people through there. I mean, there's Robert Flood was working with this stuff and sung its praises and things like that. Before we get to Mesmer, there was a chap, Hell, as well, who was working with iron magnets, steel magnets, um, for healing and things like that. So Mesmer didn't come up with this himself. He learned it from the people before him and so on and so forth back through time. What he did was make it into something fashionable in this sort of bohemian Europe. And his seances consisted of, dimly lit rooms with mirrors and him in his robes playing a glass harmonium with a baquet, which was this wooden barrel with iron rods sticking out of it and ropes and iron filings and all this sort of stuff going on and people having convulsions and crises and uh, sort of clearing of energy from their system and having spontaneous remissions and all sorts of weird miraculous cures. He cured a blind pianist and restored her sight. These are miraculous cures that were on the same level as some of the cures that we read about in the Bible and other religious texts. And these miraculous cures have continued to this day in the placebo effect. I'm going to get more onto that as we look at the French Commission by Louis XVI and things like that. But the stories of people being given a placebo and all of their tumors from stage 4 cancer disappearing in a weekend and then being up and about the wards on the Monday morning and things like that. So these miraculous cures that were happening in this time are still happening today, but we're calling them the placebo effect now. And this is really something that I think is a problem with the language we're using just now. Because when we look at Mesmer and what he was doing, he was putting on these events, these society evenings, and the rich people of Europe were going to them. Now, Louis XVI commissioned a report into mesmerism, and Ben Franklin happened to be on that commission. And I find that interesting because he's the guy that made the glass harmonium that Mesmer used in his seances. And you'd have to sort of know Ben Franklin to be able to get one of these because he was making them. So there's this crossover in this circle of people that knew each other. Now, Mesmer refused to be a part of this commission. So one of his students took up the mantle and opened his offices in Paris to this. I'll put all the details in a document and attach it below so you've got a bit more of a timeline of this. But essentially, the commission set up one of the first blind placebo trials. So what they were doing was they were testing to see if we tell this subject that that tree's been magnetized when actually that tree was magnetized. Will he fall into trance when he touches that tree or when he touches that tree, etc., etc. So there's various different tests done. I'm not going to go into detail on them all. If you want, we can do a bit on that French Commission at some point. But essentially, the results showed that the suggestion was the contributing factor, and imagination and that side of things was what's really causing the effect rather than someone manipulating magnetic energy within the system. Now, I think something was lost there. I think there's an element of somatic nonverbal suggestion that can have a very powerful influence in the therapeutic change facilitation world. But we'll go into more on that on the next video about what is mesmerism or what I think mesmerism might be. So from there, mesmerism was effectively debunked. And they never claimed that mesmerism didn't work. This commission wasn't into whether it worked or not. into whether Mesmer was accurate in his ideas about a magnetic fluid or whether it was just suggestion. So, what essentially we're seeing here is the birth of suggestive therapeutics, the birth of the placebo, the birth of the double blind trial, all of these things being born. And what this commission was actually doing was saying what is going to be called hypnosis in the future, suggestive therapeutics, is actually what's at play here. It's causing the effect. It's what we're calling this placebo effect. And the magnetic passes are essentially doing nothing. So we're seeing here the first placebo trial, but we're also seeing the birth of the term placebo really as a replacement for hypnosis. And if we understand that placebo and hypnotic effect are sort of interchangeable, we can start to see that, when we test a drug, for instance, like in modern times, we do a double-blind placebo trial. So what we're really doing there is we're seeing if a figure of authority suggesting that this will heal with nothing but a sugar pill is as effective or more effective than this chemical that this drug company's made. So what's really going on there is this drug as good as hypnosis? If it's as good or better than hypnosis, then the drug gets approved. If hypnosis or the placebo effect is stronger or as strong as the drug gets rejected. So all of our drugs, all of our procedures, all of our medical stuff in this day and age has been tested against hypnosis. We call it a placebo trial, but it's a hypnotic trial. Does suggestion work as well as this drug? And when you start to understand that as a hypnotist, it opens up this whole new potential because when we start to realize that what we're really doing in hypnosis is conscious control of the body and mind's own healing ability, we start to see that these miraculous cures that were done in olden times and also appear in placebo trials are also possible with our suggestive therapeutics. So just bear that in mind as you continue down this road. Now, from this commission, there's various people still using mesmerism and magnetism around Europe and in the UK and across the world. It's largely stage shows. There is stuff being done in operations and things like that. So we've got Easdale in India, we've got Elliotson, we've got various different people working with mesmerism for operations and as a replacement for some form of pain relief or analgesia, anesthesia before this was something that was widely available for operations. These are the days of like, biting something and having a doctor hacksaw off your leg and stuff like that. So anything that could help reduce or remove the pain was beneficial, and they were using mesmerism for this. Now, mesmerism in India, which is James Easdale's book, is not really mesmerism in India. It's actually the passes and blowing that he was doing, while passes and blowing are both in mesmerism as well. He got the passes and the blowing that he was using from an exorcism ritual. And they were using the same types of passes, albeit slightly more sort of claw-like in Easdale's stuff compared to the more flat hand or curved hand passes of the magnetist in Europe. But it's the same thing. This is why I'm saying there's been many different names for this over the history of humanity. But at the end of the day, the results speak for themselves. The method of action has always been unclear. And I think what Mesmer was trying to do in Paracelsus before him, and a lot of the other people throughout this, really was trying to explain something using the language of the day and trying to explain something that was way beyond the understanding of most of the people of the time. And I think this is a really important point to drive home that, you know, these guys were the guys that formed the science of health and body and mind and medicine that we now work with today. Without them, we wouldn't be where we are. So we've got to thank them all for that. We've got to understand that they may have used certain words to try to explain this stuff to the common man of the day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they believed fully themselves. It may have just been them trying to explain it in a simplistic way to a mind that couldn't comprehend this level of understanding. You know, in the 1400s to the 17, 1800s, the amount of people that could read and write was limited. These guys were well-educated aristocrats, and they were trying to explain something to the general population that the general population just did not understand anything near what we understand today about medicine and psychology and all this sort of stuff. So it stands to reason they would maybe dumb it down. So give them a little bit of forgiveness for the way they presented this stuff. Um, from all this, we then have La Fontaine and James Braid. So James Braid was witness to one of La Fontaine's shows in Manchester, I think it was. And he came up with this idea that it was eye fixation and fatigue that was causing this trance-like state of hypnotism that he used the word for from the French and originally from the Greek hypnos. It was already being used as hypnotism and hypnotist in French at this point. So Braid didn't create the word hypnotism, is what I'm saying here. He copied it from the French. But he popularized it, and he also popularized this idea of monoideism, a single pointed trance. And we see Phineas Parkhurst Quimby and people like that in this sort of liminal space between mesmerism and hypnotism as well. So there's a lot going on here. But from Braid, we have the modern psychological understanding of hypnosis, and this being to do with fixation and fatigue and this sort of stuff. So we're starting to see a little bit of the method of action behind the fascination side of mesmerism coming through here as well. And the old look into my eyes, sleep, and all that sort of stuff. So at this point, we can sort of separate now from Braid forward as the history of hypnosis, which we'll cover in the hypnosis course. There will be some of that in the document attached to this as well, just so you've got a bit of background. But from here, I want to start looking at, you know, what is mesmerism or what could mesmerism be and how does it fit into the rest? So in the next video, we're going to have a look at what the claims were about mesmerism and also what I think is going on with mesmerism. And then we'll have a look at some of the ways of potentially using this within your own personal use and personal practice with others. And then finally, we'll have a little look at some of the other ways this might have been presented through history. So thank you for taking the time to listen through to my dulcet tones and pay attention to me waffling for a little bit here, because I know I do go off on tangents, but they all have a purpose. So pay attention, kiddies, and I shall see you in the next one. Stay safe. Keep smiling.